As we begin 2025, Americans are barreling towards an economic crisis at year-end. If Congress fails to act, Americans will face the largest tax increase in history, a crushing $4 trillion tax hike. We must make permanent the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and implement new pro-growth policies to reduce the tax burden on American manufacturers, service workers, and seniors. I've already spoken with several members.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and once again, I'm joined by Jeff Berkowitz with Public Affairs TV in Chicago. And Jeff, as we sit here taping this on May the 21st, we have a lot of things going on. As we tape this, we have the Republicans in the Congress, in the House, trying to come together because they have such a slim majority that they are trying to pass the president's tax bill. And before you and I take a look at what's in that bill, I just remind the people that give us your comments, give us a thumbs up if you would. It helps for the viewership and helps us on our YouTube channel. So if you're watching on YouTube, do give us a thumbs up and leave us a comment on what you think. Are you supportive of this tax cut bill that Jeff and I will be taking a look at? And Jeff, with that said, give me your ideas to start off on what's happening with this tax cut bill and if you think it will have the positive impact the president and the Republicans are claiming.
Well, the push is to have everything done on it's really not a tax cut bill, it's avoidance of a major tax increase. With the purpose, what they're doing here is making permanent the tax cuts that were passed in 2017. If they don't do that, there'll be a massive tax increase. And the concept in 2017, and they're trying to keep this for now, is you need across-the-board tax cuts, or at least avoidance of any tax increase across the board. Because people say, oh, well, the wealthy don't need it. But the wealthy are the people who are generating jobs for low-income and middle-class taxpayers here in Illinois, citizens here in Illinois. So this is tremendously important for the wealth, and I just said Illinois, but I meant across the country. So this is tremendously important for the prosperity and peace of this country. And we'll see in Illinois, we're lagging behind tremendously in pro-growth policies and in growth. And therefore, many citizens are suffering. So we need to do.
Let's get into that a little bit
okay.
down the road, not just yet. We can certainly and will take a look at the differences in the policies being pushed by the Trump administration versus the policies that we've had under the Pritzker administration within Illinois. But a lot of people, and you hear this on the Democratic side of the aisle in the Congress, you frequently hear that this is a tax cut for billionaires and it's not going to help the middle class. The statistics show that that's not true when we look at the tax cuts of 2017. And what you touched on, I disagree slightly, but you're largely right that a lot of the tax cut in the 2025 bill is a continuation of existing law. The 2017 tax cuts under Trump in his first term were set to expire at the end of this year. Now, this new tax cut, what they're going to do is extend that bill and extend it in perpetuity. They're not going to have a good until expiration date in the bill. Now, a future Congress could pass a new bill that would either cut taxes or raise taxes, but the bill being passed, if they do pass it right now, will continue to serve in perpetuity. But that said, let's look at just real quickly here. This is part of what we see as the House advances the budget bill, $5 trillion in tax cuts, $1.5 trillion in spending cuts. Now that's new. It makes, as I just said, the 2017 cuts permanent, raises the debt limit by $5 trillion. a lot of conservatives on the House side and the Republicans didn't like that. But you need to have a little bit of wiggle room before you can turn the economy around. You got 175 billion for border security. That would end up saving people if we continue to keep illegal immigrants out. And 150 billion for defense. Some of that will be going not only to equipment but to a pay raise the president just promised recently. And yeah, go ahead.
So let me just say, bring that slide back up for a second.
All right, all right,
To see.
all right.
This is very much the Trump agenda that he ran on. The border security is in there, the defense spending is in there, the avoidance of a tax increase is in there, and the one thing's not that he ran on was keep inflation low. But he thinks all of these things are necessary, along with a few others, to keep inflation low. But the point is, this is what he ran on, Donald Trump, and he's delivering. People say about Donald Trump, he's one of the few modern presidents who actually delivers on what he promises. And we'll see if he can deliver on what he promised when he ran last year.
Well, the other thing I would say, Jeff, that is not in that slide is that the president, which he ran on, is going to eliminate income taxes on tips, on I think up to $25,000, if I recall, on Social Security and on overtime pay. Now, those are direct benefits to middle-class workers. I don't think a lot of billionaires are out there waiting tables on the weekend. So this is going to be stimulative to the economy. And I would remind the people that the president just came back from a Middle East tour that was widely regarded as being successful. He raised $1.4 trillion in new commitments of investment inside the United States. And so far, since he's taken office this year, Trump has now raised approximately $10 trillion in commitments from companies and from countries to build new plants in the United States, or as we have in the case of Saudi Arabia, to purchase things that are made in America. And they, I believe, have something like $600 billion commitments to buy Boeing aircraft. So all of this is combined with the tax cuts. This is how you get an economy going. And also what the president will do, but he can do this on his own largely, is cut regulations to streamline, get rid of so much of the delays in getting some of these projects going. So when you go to build a plant, you can make it happen a lot faster.
The one new word that has entered the vocabulary of Republicans under Trump is populism. Because that's what there's no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, investment that brings about jobs for middle class people, middle class earners. This is the new Republican Party that Trump is building through populism. Populism is often not a good thing. In this respect, many would say it is. It ends up tying these people to the tax cuts, to the JFK. A rising tide lifts all boats. JFK was one of the first modern tax cutters. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, our president from 1961 to 1963, a life cut terribly short by that assassination that we all know about in 1963. But this is integrating in a sense.
And Jeff, you bring up the point. Let me because I have a slide on what you're referring to. John F. Kennedy, in the decade before he became president in the 1950s, we had something like 4 recessions. When Kennedy came in, he said he had a tax cut bill to stimulate the economy. And as he said here in the speech, this is taken from it, it's paradoxical truth that tax rates are too high, tax revenues too low, and the soundest way to raise revenues in the long run is to cut the rates now. Cutting taxes now, he said, is not to incur a budget deficit, but to achieve the more prosperous, expanding economy which can bring a budget surplus. And that bill that John F. Kennedy proposed was passed, sadly, after his death in November of 1963. The bill was passed as a way to honor the fallen president in January of 1964. And it did lead, as President Kennedy suggested, to a very strong economy in the 1960s, where we had multiple years of growth and the federal government got more tax revenue coming in because of those tax cuts. That's what the President of the United States today is trying to emulate. It happened under JFK, it happened under Ronald Reagan, it happened under George W. Bush when they cut the marginal income tax rates. And the proof is not my opinion or your opinion, Jeff. It's in the fact that we had the Treasury numbers and revenues have increased every single time that we've cut the rate of taxation on marginal income tax rates.
Well,
and of course, you could talk because you have basically a PhD in economics. But tell us about the Laffer curve and basically what he proposed.
Well, the continuity here is 1960 under JFK, 1980 under the Reagan tax cuts, then Bush tax cuts, that's George W. Bush, and now the preservation of these tax cuts and avoidance of tax rate increases by Donald Trump. So there's that continuity really from 1960 to 2025. And the emphasis, the key point you made, Terry, is there's emphasize you're cutting tax rates to raise ultimately tax revenue. And that's what the Laffer curve deals with, because the Laffer curve shows that initially when you raise tax rates, you raise tax revenue, but at some point when you keep increasing tax rates, tax revenue starts coming down. And that's what people mean by the Laffer curve. That's Art Laffer, the current, still great economist, still behind a lot of the Trump policy, Larry Kudlow, Steve Moore, and Art Laffer.
I mean, look, we have the numbers. If you're doing a science experiment and you do it 4 or 5 times and you get the same results every time, why on the 6th time would you question that you're not going to get the same results? We've cut taxes before. The results are in. You get more money because the economy grows. And we're the Republicans right now because are struggling to get the bill passed, this tax cut bill passed, because they can't count on any one member of the House in the Democrat caucus. They need to get that passed, because if they don't, then by the end of the year, when the 2017 tax cuts go out, you would have an increase across the board of people's taxes that would go back to the rates of taxation that we had in 2016 before the Republicans passed the initial tax cut back in 2017. I'm monitoring the news as we tape this on May 21st in the middle of the day. And Jeff, just in case it could be that close, we'll have to see whether or not they are going to have a vote today or not, maybe tomorrow. The thing I would say, the holdup for a lot of the Republicans was to come to terms on what they call the SALT deductions. There were 4 Republicans that were newly elected from the state of New York, which is why the Republicans took control of the House. And according to Bloomberg, the Republicans did have an agreement on those SALT caps. Now, what that is how much of your mortgage payments can you deduct off of your income taxes? They're raising the cap to $40,000, and that will phase out once you get an income over $500,000. So apparently, that's the deal that is going to give the House Republicans enough of their members to support the president's tax cut, and we'll have to see. But it is imminent now, either today or tomorrow, that they'll vote.
So we don't run out of time. We're getting granular now talking about the politics of New York. I understand that relevance, but maybe we can turn to Illinois now, because it's a good contrast in the negative growth policies of J.B. Pritzker in Illinois and their results, in contrast to the pro-growth policies we're seeing at the federal level. So I think we have some slides that illustrate.
Let me
If we
let me
go
bring up the first slide here. We'll have some from our friends here at WirePoints that crunch the numbers. And go ahead, take it away, Jeff. What are we looking at in this slide here? Where the headline, Bloomington metro area economic growth ranked the nation's worst since 2019. And of course, that's when President, or our governor rather, Pritzker
so
took office, is why we go to 2019.
the big picture here is these slides deal with the fact that the country has almost 400 metro statistical areas. These are geographic areas that are larger than one city. And so you notice when we say Bloomington metro area economic growth ranks the nation's worst, that's Bloomington, Illinois, and the nation's worst since 2019. These slides deal with data starting in 2019, going 20 through 2024.
That's hard to read on the bottom.
post-COVID.
Let me read that for some people. The Bloomington, it says, what is the rate of growth, the percent of change from 2019 to 2023? And Bloomington has a negative growth.
Minus 17%.
I couldn't make out if that was 17% or 1.7%. But
No,
they have
it's
negative growth.
Go ahead. And Terry, negative growth in what? In GDP, gross domestic product for the state of for Illinois, or for the regions in this case of Illinois. Bloomington went from a GDP of $14 billion, I believe it is, and it's going to a little bit more than $12 billion. And so that's a terrible decrease, and that means populism, that means loss of jobs, loss of well-being for the working class people. And as it says, 6 Illinois metro areas rank in the bottom 25%. So you have these 385 metro statistical areas across the country, and the bottom is the bottom quartile. And six Illinois metro areas are in that bottom 25%.
Well, Jeff, people could
They're
say,
right there.
well, maybe that's just because a plant closed in Bloomington. But let's take a look at another city, the major city.
Before you go, Terry, before you go, look at that slide again. It's hard for them to read, but ahead, above Bloomington is Rockford and Danville and Peoria and Carbondale and Springfield, right next to you, Terry. These are all
and while they had
areas, but low
their growth was slow growth.
2%,
Yeah, you see
3%, 4%. Okay?
You see that,
and we'll see
barely any growth at all.
the highest. These are the 10 metro areas in the state of Illinois. Chicago, which is supposed to be the engine of growth, is down there at 4%. And we're not talking national, where we have rates of growth for the country at 1 to 4%. We're talking in these areas, they range from minus 17% to 48. Kankakee is actually doing reasonably well relative to Chicago at 12%. Now we can go to the second slide, I think, and
Well, let's
expand
go
the
to
analysis a little bit.
Chicago here. Obviously, Chicago is the major economic engine of the state of Illinois. And just quickly remind people that as we tape this, by the end of next week, right after Memorial Day weekend that we're about to go into, the legislature of Illinois has to pass the budget for the coming fiscal year, which begins July 1. So this issue of how much the state is spending, whether or not we should be having tax increases, all of that is happening right now. But the House Republicans and in the Senate and the House, I should say, Republicans in the Illinois legislature can't do anything on their own because the Democrat Party has supermajority. So with that said, we're on the verge of another budget being passed, maybe new taxes being added. This is where we are on the growth of Chicago, and it says in the headline, which people can read, Chicago metro area suffers the worst economic growth among the nation's 15th largest metro areas. Jeff, you are in Chicago. What's the story on that?
So this chart shows us, look at the left side, that Chicago 4% GDP growth adjusted for inflation from 2023 versus 2019. But look on the right side, where's the growth? That's more in the red states, like Phoenix, the city in Arizona, and then Miami in Florida. You're talking there 16, 17, 20% relative to Chicago's 4%. Again, this is populism. This is where the rubber hits the road. These are people without jobs. They have low income jobs. Where in other states and red states and in cities in red states, they're getting jobs, they're getting more jobs, they're getting better jobs, they're getting growth. This and tie it to politically right now, Terry. We've talked about governors and senators, GOP credible governor and senator candidates possibly coming up. We're talking about we're talking about Richard Porter, we're talking about Todd Ricketts, we're talking about Darren LaHood possibly running for the U.S. Senate from Illinois. We're talking about Ted Dabrowski running possibly for governor. These are the new credible potential Republican politicians who could lead a pro-growth, pro-prosperity
Well, that's
era
the
in
idea. The
Illinois.
point is public policy has an impact on economics, and that's the theme of this show. At the national level, Trump says, I know how to grow the economy. I'm a businessman, and we're going to cut taxes to put more money into the hands of the American families, the American consumers. I will remind people 60% of the U.S. economy operates on consumer spending. So when you put a tax cut in, when the consumer has more money in their pocket, they are going to spend it. And if you think about whether it's food or going to buy a car or going to buy clothing, whatever it might be, if you're going out to a bar to buy a couple of beers, that is what fuels so much of economic activity and so much of American employment. And we contrast
Maybe
that
we
with what is happening. This is what Jeff and I are
wait,
getting at.
maybe we can illustrate what you just said. Let's go to that third slide coming up on growth in Illinois or lack of
Well,
growth,
here's the
right?
Illinois Metro GDP. And as you
Right,
see here,
because
growth lags dramatically behind the nation's top 10 metro areas.
it's hard for folks to read. They can maybe magnify it at home, but let's take a look right now and we'll read it for you or with you. Look at that top slide, that top 10. Those are the top 10 metro areas across the country. The Villages in Florida, that's a town called the Villages in Florida. That number one, number two, Midland, Texas. Number four, and I can't even read it myself, but
Hang on
it's
just a second here, Jeff, and I'm going
number
to,
five.
hang on, I'm going to bring it
You can make
in
a
to where
large.
now
That's
it's
great.
easier to read.
So El Centro in California, that's one of the good things California is actually doing. Bowling Green in Kentucky, Provo, Oregon, and Provo or Rem in Utah, Palm Bay in Florida,
And the point
Lake
is,
Cava
these are
in
growing,
Arizona.
and we see contrast to the Illinois metro areas, and
But
we
before you
have slower
contrast, just
growth.
guide the people to look at those top 10 I read. Go to the third column. That's the percent growth, 48% to 23%. These are really high growth areas. These are jobs. This is the welfare of the people. This is not, we're talking the wealthy. This is the welfare of the people. This is growing. This is GDP. And now let's look at what was happening if you scroll up in Illinois. Kankakee, 12%, doing relatively well relative to Chicago, Naperville, Elgin at 4%, much better than Bloomington, Illinois at 17%. Remember Bloomington? That was the area that Pritzker said we're going to bloom and boom with what? EV growth, electric vehicles, right? Hasn't quite happened, has it, Ted? Terry? Okay, I mean 17%
Let me. I think
negativity
we're
for
making our
Bloomington.
point here, but I want to bring one more slide in before we run out of
Okay.
time. And here's where Illinois has suffered the nation's fourth worst real economic growth since Governor Pritzker took office. Now that, when you look at the Pritzker record, and he says, look, I've had upgrades in the credit rating of Illinois, which is true. And in some ways, Governor Pritzker has done some positive things. We had Governor Rauner was not passing budgets. We have had budgets passed under Governor Pritzker. But the policies of taxation, of not cutting back on some of the spending, and it continues to show the impact here. that we are just not growing the Illinois economy as fast as other states where the taxation levels are not as
These are,
onerous.
folks, if people can't see, these are 50 states in this chart arrayed from the left to the right. Illinois is the fourth worst in real economic growth since Pritzker took office 6 years ago at 5%. Florida is the second best at 26%. The other states are in between. And maybe we can go quickly to see some of the people who suffered the most under the Pritzker policies are the people he says he's most concerned about in terms of equity. Chicago has, do we have that slide? Chicago has the third highest percentage of black households that depend on food stamps among the nation's
Well,
15
let's
biggest
say
cities.
Chicago is the highest black poverty rate among the nation's 15 biggest cities.
Well, that's another slide that makes a similar point.
Similarly,
Right.
what you were talking about,
These are the
Chicago
15 biggest.
has the third highest percentage of black households depend on food stamps, as you were mentioning, among the nation's 15 biggest cities. So this is not just where it's economic drag on business people and billionaires. This is hitting hard the poorest among our residents, especially in the urban areas.
You want to be compassionate and take care and assist people who are low income and give them food stamps, but that's not your ultimate goal. Your ultimate goal is to help them become self-sufficient and get off food stamps. On that, Governor Pritzker is doing a terrible job. This is not about politics. This is just simple evaluation, looking at the data.
Let me bring up, speaking of data, let me bring up another slide here. And as you can see, Chicago has the highest black unemployment rate among the nation's 15th largest cities. That does not happen by accident. You have a black mayor, you have blacks in power structure all through. This is no longer the argument that was made back in the 1960s of racism and holding blacks back. This is the Democrats in Chicago control the legislature. 2/3 of the Illinois legislature is from the Chicagoland area, and they're voting for the Pritzker record. So this is something that we don't get enough coverage from the Illinois news media of the real impact of these policies. And if we're going to praise Governor Pritzker, and I'll praise him for doing a number of things, but you have to look at the whole record. And the impact of these taxes, the impact of him welcoming so many illegal aliens, and the billions of dollars being spent on their care, this has an impact, folks, and it's something that the voters of Illinois have to consider.
Well, yeah, and those data we were showing, that was 2023. You said a black mayor, but there was another black mayor who preceded Brandon Johnson, and that was Lori Lightfoot. I never heard her talking about the high black unemployment rate in Chicago and Illinois relative to other cities and states. And you said you have to give the governor credit for the upgrades. Well, maybe you would, but as most people know, including you, Terry, Illinois was flush with COVID money.
We got billions of dollars that came in. By the way, we're almost out of time, but when President Trump cut taxes back in 2017, in the spring of, I believe it was 2018 or 2019, Illinois found it had an extra $1 billion because the economy was growing under Trump in the first term. Jeff, we're almost out of time. Obviously, as we tape this, it's just as we're going into Memorial Day weekend, we'll remember all of those, both in our armed services as well as our police officers and fire people who serve the nation, and we should remember those. And folks, don't forget, give Jeff and I a comment, give us a thumb up if you would. We hope you and your family have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend and a great summer. Jeff and I will be watching what happens in Washington. Until next week, Jeff, I'll say goodbye, and you can say goodbye as well. Take care.